Kant had this. He described the sublime as beauty mixed with terror, and that to me is big tarpon fishing. Like it is that, because you really, I've seen. I won't mention names. Some of the best anglers that I know. I've seen them in a bow and seen a 120-pound tarpon come at them, and seen this person who is the best caster I've ever seen completely lose his shit. And
hi everyone, Tim Schultz here. Hey, thank you for listening to the Reading the Water podcast. Our guest for this episode is the terrific writer, Monte Burke. Monte's the author of several books exploring obsessions in football and fishing, including a definitive biography of Nick Saban and Lords of the Fly, which chronicles the hunt for the world record tarpon. Monte and I will discuss many things, including the connections between fly fishing, writing, and religion, the phenomena of bad Hemingway and bad Garrick in fishing writing, and what we can do to improve the outlook for tarpon. Monte is a fascinating guy in so many dimensions, and I'm really looking forward to talking with him. So let's get him on the show. Well, hi, Monte. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Wonderful here. You at home right now?
I am. I'm sitting in my living room right now.
Oh, great. Have you been traveling lately?
I just got back from Andros, actually.
Oh, really? Well, my next question, I was going to say, more importantly, are you doing any fishing? But maybe that does that answer that question?
It does, yes.
How'd that go?
It was great. I'd never been there before. I've been to a lot of places in the Bahamas, but I'd never been to Andros, and it was really cool. Lived up to every expectation. We had great bone fishing. We had shots at tarpon. We caught big fish. It was really fun.
Oh wow, wow, that's great. I live in the Upper Peninsula, and I'm looking out the window right now. I don't see any snow there, but we still have just a little bit of snow on the ground. So I'd rather been with you.
I came back to gloomy Brooklyn, New York. So we're not quite as cold as you are, but it's not exactly warm here. So
yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, fishing. So fishing has been a very prominent part of your writing career. Many between sports, fishing, of course, a lot of other topics. But I want to open up with a question about fishing. I heard Tom McGuane once on a podcast talk about so much writing and fishing, and he might have even compared it to mathematics, saying that in some Library of Congress data that it's certainly up there. It's one of the most written about topics. Why do you think that's been? Well, and maybe speak for other writers if you can. You can guess on them, but then of course, what about yourself? What draws you to write about fishing?
Well, I mean, it's something that I just. By the way, I always read that The Complete Angler was the second best-selling book of all time. I don't know if that's true. That might just be sort of rumor that people perpetuate after the Bible, of course.
Right.
It's just, for me, it was always something. I mean, something I did since I can remember. I mean, I kind of started fly fishing when I was 6 years old, and been past. My grandfather was a fly fisherman. My father was a fly fisherman. My uncle was a fly fisherman. So it's always been kind of a part of my life. But in terms of why to me, it kind of lends itself very naturally to storytelling. I mean, if you look at spectator sports, the sport that is written about most and with sort of the most beauty is baseball. And there's a lot of downtime in baseball. It's not a very fast game. They're trying to get it faster now, obviously, but there's some similarities to fishing and baseball. I feel like the fishing is also very kind of contemplative, and it's just such a thing that lends itself to storytelling. I mean, if you think about it, the stories sort of start before you even get on the water. You think about, let's say you have a trip coming up. You start to think about, what conditions will I face? Who am I going to be with? What should I bring? It's that anticipation. You're kind of building up all the anticipation there. And then I've always found anyway, when I'm fishing, whether I'm by myself or even when I'm with someone else, with a guide or something like that, so much of the day takes place in your own head. I mean, you're wondering how to approach this fish. Why did I miss this fish? What can I do better? There's self-castigation. There's congratulation. There's a lot of stuff kind of going on in your head. So even when you're with a buddy or whatever, so much of this kind of takes place in your head. And then, of course, you're always working on too, as you're on the water, how you're going to report the story, how you're going to talk about it when people ask you how it went, right? Whether you're going to be brief, whether you're going to go into real strong detail, we're going to talk about the big one that got away or the big one that you got. So it's just such a sort of natural sport for storytelling. It's always been used as allegory as well. Of course, there's the Jesus going to the two disciples and saying, cast aside those nets. We're going to go, don't fish for fish. We're going to go fish for men, which of course was all through storytelling as well. So it's a total natural thing. And I think that if there is a baseball of fly fishing writing, it's probably trout and Atlantic salmon have been kind of written about more than anything else. But if you think about it, everything's been written about. I mean, Kurt Dieter did a book on carp. Literally, and there's plenty of great British writers who have written about, tench and chubs and pike and stuff like that. So, so I think it just lends itself to writing.
What I heard you on another podcast once talking about people who write about fishing, and I think you used the phrase "there's a bad Hemingway" for some writers. What I think most people know what that is, but what is that, and why are people drawn to that?
Well, I mean, it's such an interesting thing because I think because it lends itself, because the sport of fly fishing in particular lends itself to storytelling, I think a lot of people want to tell their stories. So they write a lot. When I first got in this industry, I worked at Sports Afield, and I saw a lot of very bad fishing writing, which is just kind of par for the course. But there's a lot of all of writing is imitating, really. Mm-hmm. I mean, what you read, the way that I became a writer anyway, was to read the people that I wanted to write like, and read them over and over and over again. You read first for pleasure. You read the next couple times to see the bones, and then see how they put the muscles, or everything's kind of constructed. And I think some people kind of develop their own styles from doing that. I mean, music's very much the same way. I mean, look at Led Zeppelin. I mean, they were and look at Rolling Stones did Robert Johnson songs. I mean, it's kind of but it sounded different. The people there's just, as in any discipline, there are people who are kind of find their own voice, and there are people who just kind of sound like kind of knockoffs of Hemingway or whatever. Yeah. I just love I don't read a whole ton of fishing writing. Actually, I try to get other sources of inspiration. Read a lot of novels, read some historical nonfiction as well, but mainly novels actually. And I feel like it's good. I remember. Actually, this is initially when I moved to New York. I came to New York to try to find a job, and in particular to find a job at one of the outdoor sports magazines. And I went to this. There was an editor at Men's Journal named Sid Evans, who's since gone on he was at Garden Gun for a little while, but he's now at Southern Living. Great editor. And I remember sitting down with him, and here I am, some 23-year-old punk, in an ill-fitted suit, in New York for the first time talking. And he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to be an outdoor writer." And he said, "Stop right there. Don't say you want to be an outdoor writer. Say you want to be a writer." And I think, that to me was a kind of like mind-blowing thing. And then, subsequently I read a lot of Tom McGuane in particular. And what was cool about Tom McGuane is not like primarily a fishing writer, right? He's a novelist and an extraordinary short story writer who sort of moonlights, has done some, as an angling author. And what was cool about him is that he took that angling writing as seriously as he took everything else. Mm-hmm. And that for me was a really kind of, real mind-blowing, world-opening kind of thing, to see someone who took it that seriously. And his sentences are impeccable. His, the sort of style and the voice are just unbelievable. So, I don't know if that answers your question or not. Maybe I just talked around it.
That's all right. Yeah. Hey, so you mentioned your entry into outdoor writing, that type of thing. So I looked a little bit at your background, and I'm not sure where you grew up, but I know from there you found your way to Middlebury College, studied religion, and then I think one of your first jobs at Forbes was fact checker. And then obviously you've went on to develop as a very prominent writing career. That doesn't seem like a straight line to me. I mean, maybe it is.
Otis, stop it. Stop. Sorry.
That's all right. We welcome dogs here.
Yeah, he's a
It-
good
it-
lad. He barks at everything.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
stop it. Okay, he's done.
Anyway, that path, can you help us get there, and along the way talk about the role of fishing? I want to see how fishing got into your life.
So, like I said, I did that, a lot early on. It's always been a part of my life, kind of no matter what I did. And I'm a geographical mutt. I was born in New Hampshire, lived in Vermont, and at 5 years old, moved to Alabama, and then grew up primarily in North Carolina, and then back in Alabama, and then went to college up north again. So, but it was fishing was always I always had a rod with me wherever I went. I mean, I remember going to Middlebury College and having a rod and finding 3 or 4 other guys who like to fly fish. So, and then being a religion major this was back in the day when it was kind of okay to be a liberal arts major. Like you didn't have to. I never had any designs on going to theology school or anything like that, but I just was fascinated by the discipline, and with those kind of degrees, you do a lot of writing and a lot of thinking anyway. And again, religion is just like fishing; it's storytelling. That's
Right,
really what
right.
it is. The Bible is a great story. The Quran is a great story. I mean, these are all like just cool stories. So, I didn't really have the guts. I think out of college, I wanted to be a writer. Definitely wanted to be a writer, but I didn't have the guts to kind of pursue it because it seemed there were other paths that seemed maybe more lucrative and maybe not quite as dicey. And so I actually, out of college, applied to business school. And in the process of, one thing that's cool about an application after college is that you really do, you kind of have to look at your past and you kind of have to look at what's going on now and then look at kind of what you want to do in the future. And it was in the process of writing those essays when I decided I don't want to go to business school. Like I want to do something else. So I actually got into business school, went and visited, which really hit home that I did not want to go there. And then at the same time, I wrote a sort of, I still have a letter actually, the acceptance letter here, but I wrote this, there was this little creek called the Latort Spring Run. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Sure.
Where Vince Marinero and Charlie Fox used to fish. Right. And it's a tiny little slice of water, but it had a lot of history, and it just grabbed me. And it was I was in DC at the time, so I could get up there in 2 hours or whatever, but it just really kind of gut hooked me. And I wrote this 3,000 word tome on the Latort, threw everything into it, and sent it around to everybody. Sent it to the New Yorker. I mean, I was like, I didn't know what I was doing. Sent it to Field and Stream. Everybody said no, but then this magazine down south called Sporting Classics said, I got a letter, dear Mr. Burke, we would love to buy your story for $200. And I got that about the same time that I got into business school, and I was like, I'm doing that. I'm not going to business school. My future father-in-law, I wasn't married at the time, was not very happy with that decision, but
yeah,
it just happened. So, got into it, eventually did come to New York and did get a job at Sports Afield where I, was basically answering phones, but learning a lot kind of in the process. And then, worked my way up to sort of a staff writer there. And then that was bought and moved to LA and turned into a big game hunting magazine, which didn't interest me all that much. So I got a job at Forbes. Yeah. And when you start at Forbes was sort of my master's or my PhD, I would say, because when you start there, it doesn't matter where you came from, it doesn't matter how old you are. When you start there, you fact check for basically a year. We used to anyway. We don't do that anymore. So I would, some big shot writer would be writing a huge cover story in Coca-Cola, and I would be assigned to fact check it, which was really interesting because it really hammered home two things for me. Is one is the facts have to be absolutely right. You have to do, just it's the backbone of the story. If you get the facts wrong, then everything else is thrown out the window. People can just discredit the story. And the second thing it did was that it while you're fact checking, actually, if you learn the ropes a little bit, you start to kind of develop contacts because you're calling the PR people, you're calling sources, stuff like that. So all of a sudden my Rolodex is getting a little thicker with sources and stuff like that. So that was a great sort of way to learn how to, gather facts, reporting was a big deal there. That was reporting is a sort of underrated part of writing, going out and actually being able to cajole people to tell you things sometimes they don't necessarily want to tell you. Not that you're looking for dirt, but you just try to get them as comfortable as possible. And then the writing, the writing at Forbes was not necessarily, writing wasn't the most important thing. It was about facts and stuff like that. But it was a great, great, great experience. And during that, I was there for about 15 years, 14 or 15 years. And, I wrote, let's see, three books while I was there, and I would take leaves of absence.
Uh-huh.
And then after my third book, which was the Nick Saban book, the internet had kind of come in, and we were, we had to get, I can't remember what it was, 100,000 uniques every month on top of all the magazine writing we were doing and the editing we were doing. And it just didn't look like it was going in a way that I kind of wanted to do it. And the third book happened to be about Nick Saban, the football coach. So that kind of allowed me to kind of, become sort of a contributing editor of Forbes and not be on staff anymore, and kind of pursue this book thing as a freelance writer. So, but
Yeah.
all of those things, I was terrified when I moved to New York that fishing was over. I was like, and I literally spent my childhood in the woods and the waters, whether it was Vermont, New Hampshire, Alabama, North Carolina. Like, it was a very, very important thing to me, and I thought I was giving it up. And it turned out that I wasn't. The Catskills, which I fell madly in love with, big wild trout, or 2.5 hours away north. It took me a little while, but I finally discovered the waters here, right in the city, the saltwater game, which is unbelievable. It's so good.
Uh-huh.
It's like this big secret that no one. I guess people come to New York and they don't come to fish, but it could be a fishing destination. It's that good.
Wow.
So I found that as well, and so sort of could pursue those things and keep myself kind of happy and sane while living in this otherwise kind of crazy and big city. And it's actually a very good place to be a writer. There's not a lot of solitude here, but there is a decent amount of anonymity if you want it. And so I can hold myself up in my apartment and write for 2 weeks if my family's away on vacation or something like that, and not be bothered at all, which is kind of ideal for a writer.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Hey, when I was talking, I had did an interview with Hal Herring, and Hal, he's a force of nature, and we were talking about him. He was talking about fishing with trot lines and limb lines. And I asked him, I said, how you get so excited about that, but then the next thing we're talking about, he's quoting some of the great writers of all time. And I said, how do you put those two things together? And this connects to what you said about religion. Right. He said, I think they're all connected. He said, it's the exploration of the essential mystery. And when you talk about religion, I think that there's a connection, right? It kind of draws us to those things.
Absolutely. And there's a lot, there's a whole lot of faith that goes on in fishing, especially, faith when you make a cast in the water that something might happen. There's one of my favorite quotes is from this a writer I know named Paul Brune, and he will bring it up on a tough day. He always says, "Monte, you're only one cast away from greatness." And that has to do with not only faith, but this whole you're trying to connect with something. There are a lot of parallels for sure. Actually, my religion degree, if you could call it that, it has come in pretty handy, I think, for at least thinking through a lot of these things. There's always, in every one of my books, I throw in a little of what I learned in college. I try to.
Yeah, sure. Oh, that's great. We're going to talk about quite a few things, but let's talk about one of your books, Lords of the Fly. Let's see, Madness, Obsession, and the Hunt for the World Record Tarpon. That's a wonderful book. Let's see, that's been like 4 years ago now.
Yeah, it's almost be 4 years in September.
Yeah. I have to tell you, it's a great book. I went into it, I wasn't sure. I've never caught a tarpon. I want to catch a tarpon now. But I thought, well, I don't know. How interesting can a story of someone trying to catch a big tarpon be? Boy, was I wrong. It's wonderful from beginning to end. And as I was going through it, I thought, how is this going to end? It's just going to end. Okay, we're not fishing anymore. But boy, that last chapter is beautiful. I'm going to guess that's the one you enjoyed the most.
Well, it's really funny actually, because you look at these. Any piece of writing, whether it's a story or a book, is sort of, it's kind of has a musical quality to it. And I didn't know, it seemed to me that I wanted to strike a little bit of a different chord. I didn't want it to be a scratch of the vinyl. I wanted but it needed to be the rhythm needed to be different.
Yeah.
And so that one, most of it's kind of linear storytelling and full paragraphs that flow into each other. And this one I just kind of chopped it up. And kind of the pace gets picked up just a little bit, as you wrap it up. For me, a lot of times the end of books, my concentration can wander sometimes a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Partially because I'm bummed because, if it's a good book, I'm bummed it's going to be over. But it's
Right.
hard to end. It's hard to end books well. It's also hard to end, television series well and all. It's very, very hard. So I figured I'm going to try. I mean, this is sort of subconscious. It's not like I was like consciously thinking this, but I was like, I need to maybe just make the rhythm a little bit different here, and kind of just do some sort of shorter bullet pointy things that kind of lead up to this. I knew the minute I saw that last scene.
Uh-huh.
I knew the minute I saw that scene that was going to be the last scene in the book. I didn't know that, but I didn't know how to. I wanted to get there in an elegant way and not rush it, but also make it a little bit different from the other chapters. So I'm glad you liked it. I'm glad it worked out. It doesn't. Those things don't always work out, but sometimes you do that and then, oh God, you're just balling up the paper and throwing it across the room. And so
Yeah. Well, this is just a piece of it. Is you're looking at people that, if you chase the tarpon records, I suppose you better have a pretty good pile of money somewhere, right? To pull that off. And these tarpon guides, there's a part of it I'm looking at it like, well, in a way, these people, I'm not like them at all. But then in the last chapter, I realized we're all the same when you get down to it, right? It's, it really humanized the whole story, and I was thinking that same thing about it, like how hard it is to end. Movies are so hard to end, and then the producers try to get around that with the continuing dramas. They're like, hey, we don't have to end these things for a long time, so we don't confront that issue. But you did it. It was great. It was I was so happy with that.
It's so interesting. I'm glad. Again, I'm very happy that you thought it worked. I mean, because I have actually very little interest in world records. Very little interest. I've never fished for them myself. I don't care to.
Yeah.
I certainly would never kill a tarpon to try to weigh it or whatever and get a world record. But what makes people obsessed about those things does interest me. Right, the obsession part of that equation is utterly fascinating to me. So to see people, and you could argue these guys and tournament guys, whether no matter what kind of fish they're going after, are sort of like they're fishing in a very different way than most of us fish. They're fishing under pressure, and it's self-made pressure. They don't have to. These guys don't have to catch the world record tarpon, but they, guys who collect baseball cards don't have to collect baseball cards either.
Right.
The guys who went to the top of Everest for the first time certainly didn't have to go to the top of Everest. So all these, these obsessions and what leads people to do these kind of things, that's what interests me a lot. Just the human element, because I do think, as you said, we all sort of have these obsessions. I don't know if they're as fully widely blown as some of these guys who, go after tarpon or the bass guys or whatever, but we all have them. I mean, they're kind of the thing that gets you, it can be work, it can be family, it can be some hobby, but everyone has these little things that kind of gets them out of bed, in the morning and their lives, otherwise life is sort of rather dull.
Yeah. I have a friend, and he's an obsessive runner. And I once asked him about it. I said, hey, do you think you're a little obsessive about your running? And he said, no, I'm not obsessive about my running at all. He said, I run every day and I don't obsess about it. So, and I think, there's certainly a lot. So have you been back to
I have actually not been back to Homosassa. I've still been tarpon fishing. I still go with Steve Huff, who's the not the main character, but maybe the second main character in the book. I still fish with him every year. We missed COVID year, but we've been doing this for about 15 years. So I'm kind of in touch with him. I'm still in touch with Tom Evans, who does go down there every year.
Is he still getting down?
He is still getting down, but he doesn't. He just is physically unable to really. To me, it's more of he's just playing out the ritual at this point, and his family's coming down. Like he's kind of taking a little easier than he used to. But he's still going down. So so just kind of I've maintained contact with that community for sure. Which is and I hopefully always will. I mean, I get 3 days with Steve Huff every year. He doesn't. He's only got like 12 clients, something like that, and they're 3 days I look forward to almost more. I mean, I have such a good time with him on the boat. Sometimes I'm talking so much. He's like, "There's a tarpon right in front of you." I'm like, "Oh shit!" you know, there where, you know.
Yeah.
So I just enjoy hanging out with him, and I just enjoy, you know, these are repositories of history. These are some of the greatest anglers to ever live and guides that ever live, and they all got
Right.
there through being obsessed about it, and they're you know the innovations they came up with have helped it make it easier for the rest of us and accessible to the rest of us. And so I mean it's just you know it's a I just love being around it.
Yeah, yeah. You know, the other theme in the book that really resonated with me was this. How do I describe it? It reminds me, and I'm going to screw this up. There was a movie many years ago, and where oh gosh, who I want to say Robert De Niro was in it, but I could be getting this all screwed up. Where he had some kind of mental problem, and a psychiatrist got him out of it, and everything was so wonderful, and then he went back and it was gone. And so, you know, they found this wonderful thing, and then this deep sadness when it goes away. So that theme is in the book. Yeah, what's the current trajectory?
For you mean like for the fit for Homosassa or
Yeah, for
for
Homosassa, and then maybe in general, how
yeah
is the tarpon?
it's not good in Homosassa. I mean
Uh-huh.
it's still worth going. You know, I mean I wouldn't if any. I've had a lot of people say, hey, should I go down there and check it out? It's I would always say yes.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
the flats alone, you know, these 6 to 8 feet flats with just white sand everywhere and these piles of black rocks.
Sure.
It's so like mind blowing. You know, it's so beautiful. And you know, there are days when you see hundreds of fish come in, and they are still very large.
Yeah, yeah.
The two fish I've hooked down there both broke my hook, and these are good. You know, Gamakatsu. These are nice hooks.
Yeah.
Um, However, it's not like it was, and it will. I don't see any way back to how it was. I mean, there was you know there were thousands of fish. If you talk to some people, Steve Huff swears there were 10,000 fish when they got there. I mean, it was just fish everywhere, and that era is over. I think. I mean that era requires you know are they going to restore the aquifer? Is the freshwater flow? Are they going to manage the freshwater flow so it actually goes back to its historical average? I just don't see that ever happening. I don't, you
Uh-huh.
know, quote unquote progress, especially when it comes to real estate and development stuff like that, is very unlikely to be halted. So I don't think you know the future of the Homosassa fishery might just be like this. I mean, it might be a couple hundred fish. They're very big. It's worth going, but I don't see it ever going back to its glory years. And there are some there's some warning signs kind of flashing in front of our eyes here. I mean, we're not seeing it quite yet because tarpon live so long, but about the population of tarpon in general in Florida.
Uh-huh.
I mean,
Uh-huh.
Florida is, and I don't know if I can cuss on this podcast, but
Yeah.
it's an ecological shit show. I mean,
Uh-huh.
and no one cares because they're, you know, the dollar is what everyone's going for. They don't regulate anything. They just literally put straws down and pipe up that water to the next golf course, the next development. I mean, there's been no forethought about all this. And at some point, the chickens are going to come home to roost.
Right.
You know, you've got these, I don't know if you follow what's going on down there, but Lake Okeechobee is all dammed up now and it gets all, you know, full of phosphates, all these horrible things. And then periodically when it gets too high, they throw it down 2 rivers and it goes to the coast and it kills everything on those coasts.
Yeah.
That water also being dammed up means it doesn't flow through the Everglades, which was the natural flow of water, which means that the Florida Bay is not getting the fresh water it needs. Homosassa doesn't get the fresh water it needs. And then you've got development all over the coast. And every time you develop on the coast, you're killing mangroves for the most part. And mangroves are essential, you know, arguably the most, not inarguably the most important plant/tree in Florida, and one of the most
Yeah.
important ones in the world in terms of oxygen production, but also, you know, storm and hurricane barriers and shock absorbers, sort of, but also for tarpon habitat and other fish.
Uh-huh.
You know, baby tarpon tend to grow up kind of around mangroves and those kind of weird mangrove ponds you see at high tide and stuff like that. And that's all being developed over. So again, we're not seeing it quite yet because tarpon can live to 7 years old. So there's still a lot of
Yeah.
tarpon around. You know, one of the fun things about this book, just as a digression, is that
Sure.
Tom Evans, who's been going down there since the 70s, there's a decent chance that he's seen a fish in the last couple of years that he saw when he first went there. I mean, there is a
Wow.
mathematical possibility that that's the case, right? That they
Uh-huh.
do live long, they come back to the same spots. So there's, you know, he could be waving his fly rod at some of the same fish he was waving at back in the late 70s and 80s. But anyway, because these fish live so long, and they are very adaptable. They've lived through ice ages and heat waves, all that sort of stuff too. But
Yeah.
I wonder if we have just passed a point of no return and don't know it yet,
Mm-hmm.
with what's going on down there. I wish I had a magic wand to make everyone wake up,
Yeah.
and get proper flows in the Everglades would be the first place to start. But also just to manage the natural resources. Florida is a wonder world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a shame to watch it be slowly sort of destroyed. It's very hard to find places in Florida now which are old school Florida.
Yeah.
Some places in the Panhandle, maybe Everglades City. There's if it doesn't have a great beach, sometimes that's the only way
Mm-hmm.
to kind of save it. But
Yeah. Hey, you mentioned baby tarpon and juvenile tarpon. What put me through the life of a tarpon? What and
so they kind of grow up in low oxygen environments, in backwaters really, and they do. That's kind of ecologically speaking, that's the smart thing to do because you stay away from the snook, and that's one of the reasons that they are facultative air breathers. When you see a tarpon, porpoise as they call it, or roll or whatever, they're coming up to grab a gulp of air, which is something they do when they're babies. They can live in these low oxygen places because they can breathe air.
yeah.
Which is really, really cool. And then they get bigger and they're still living in the sort of, backwaters, I guess, when they're small. The ones I've seen anyway have all been in kind of like the, back channels and near the mangrove, stuff like that. And then they get bigger and they start, hanging out with other big tarpon. And then the coolest thing about tarpon is we don't know much about them, which there are a lot of groups out there which are trying to know more about them, like for conservation sake, which is a good thing.
Right.
To me, the mystery of them is kind of cool too. We don't know. There's never been a recorded instance of a tarpon spawning. We have no idea actually how it happens. We have theories, but we don't really know. They go off, they'll be all over the place in the Keys and in the Everglades, and all of a sudden, most of them are gone, and they go way out somewhere in the Gulf, somewhere deep. And the theory is anyway that they dive down very deep, and that expels the eggs and expels the milt and whatever, and that's kind of where it happens. But no one's actually ever seen it. So, which I kind of love. I kind of love that there's some sort of.
Well, that's fascinating. Yeah.
And they're really denizens of the deep ocean, which we know very little about too. We know way more about the moon. We know way more about Mars than we do about some of the deeper parts of our ocean. We just come in contact with them when they come shallow and they're sort of spawning ritual.
What percentage of the year are they in places where we see them and fish for them?
They can be. There's such thing as a resident tarpon. So there's a tarpon that they're almost like landlocked salmon. They sort of they live in these places all year round. We have here in the Hudson River, we have resident striped bass as well. The majority of the striped bass migrate, but we do have residents. So it's kind of the same thing. They have kind of the same thing. But most of them are migratory, and the big ones we see, they migrate. They're actually can be as far north as Nova Scotia. They're usually in the Gulf Stream. Occasionally they'll come in. I have two fishing buddies here in New York who striped bass fishing on the flats is a big deal now out in Long Island. And one Tom Colicchio, who's a chef, and one Paul Dixon, who's a famous guide, have seen tarpon on the flats in Long Island off of Monte, which is so cool. So occasionally they will come in. But so, in the northern parts of their range, they're sort of staying out in the deeper water in the Gulf Stream. But then they, around the Carolinas, they start to kind of come in a little bit and actually develop fisheries now in the Carolinas and Georgia and some of the places where people didn't fish for them that much. But then, Florida and the Gulf Coast and Mexico, that's kind of where that's kind of where they come in. I think it's all, again, we don't know, but we think it's all spawning, pre-spawning behavior and post-spawning behavior.
How big is a baby tarpon? What classifies weight range on those?
That's a great question. So generally to me, a baby tarpon would be probably 20 pounds or less, maybe 15 pounds or less. Yeah. And those are, when you get them at 15 pounds is a great.
Oh yeah.
What's interesting about the really small ones, the 5 pounders, I actually don't personally, I've only fished for them once and I don't think I'll do it again. I hate fishing for baby tarpon. It doesn't, it just seems, they're not, they're fun. They're acrobatic. It's like catching a nice shad. It just seems like, I don't need to put a hook in this guy's mouth. Let's let him get a little bigger, then we'll tussle with him. But what's interesting about them is their mouths are so bony at that point. It's really hard to hook them.
Uh-huh.
You have to really strip set to hook the little ones, which also is kind of weird. But and then you get to like some people prefer to catch, the sort of 15 to 50 pounders, I'll say, because you can
Hmm.
actually land fairly quickly. I mean, and you get all the spectacular stuff out of it,
Yeah.
um, which is good because then, when you get to the bigger ones, there could be trouble landing them. And if you're not good at it, like I wasn't in the beginning, you can fight them for way too long, and it exhausts you and the fish, and it's no good for anybody.
Yeah.
But once
Yeah.
you kind of catch a couple of them, you start to learn. All right, I'm going to get this thing in 25 minutes, 20 minutes, or I'm going to just break it off because there's no reason to put myself or
Yeah.
the fish through this ordeal.
I mean, some of the timelines you described, I'm recalling one that like a day or 12 hours or something.
Billy Pate, who was a
Yeah.
world famous and great angler. Not he kind of babied his fish a lot of times after he hooked them, and he was, of
Yeah.
course, fishing for record, so he really wanted to get in. But yeah, there was one he hooked a fish at like, when did he hook that fish? He hooked it at about noon or 1 o'clock or something like that in the afternoon, and he finally got it in at one in the morning.
Uh-huh.
It's just
Oh
absolutely
my
insane.
gosh.
Well, a
Yeah.
12-hour fight. I think I put in my book that Billy Pate would have been a horrible fishing partner. Can you imagine if you're fishing with him
Yeah.
and he's the fish, you're like, oh man, there goes my day. I'm not going to
Yeah,
get shot.
right. Yeah. Oh my
No,
gosh.
most hopefully anyway, that most guides, I think they've started to do this. Is like, let's horse this thing and get it in. And one thing that's so fascinating to me about big tarpon fishing, which blew my mind when I first did it, is how hard you fight these fish. I mean, you don't
Yeah.
in hunting or in fishing, sometimes in hunting, I guess, but in fishing, you don't usually have to you don't have to fight back that much, right? Even
Uh-huh.
if you hook a nice salmon or if you hook a nice bonefish, if you just kind of hold your rod steady and let them kind of tire themselves out and then kind of reel it in. With a tarpon, if you do that, you're Billy Pated. You're going to be there for 12
Uh-huh.
hours. And if you don't get them, if you don't sort of conquer them early and they get their second wind, oddly, their second wind sometimes can be stronger than their first one. So
Uh-huh.
you really want to get on top of it, and you're literally pulling even with a 12-pound class tippet or a 16-pound class tippet. It's amazing. I did this with Andy Mill. We actually did weights on it, and you pull as hard as you can. You pull literally
Uh-huh.
as hard as you can. You're pulling with like the butt of the rod, and you're pulling. You don't want to pull with just your arms. You're pulling with your whole body. Like you're really fighting these things. Like it's crazy. Like at the end of a good fight, like I'm drenched with sweat. I've got where the rod was in my belly. I've got like a big red welt where my belly was. Like my hands all messed. I can't uncurl my hand. I mean, it's really cool. It's a really interesting thing to have something that fights back, and of course is in much better shape than any of its pursuers. I mean, so it's a
Yeah.
really cool dynamic to big tarpon fishing.
Yeah. And that's exciting. I mean, I think anybody that fishes for anything can relate. Um, I hope to do it one day, and I know I'm going to be afraid of hooking that first fish.
Well,
It's
there's, I mentioned that in the book too about this every day. One of the cool things about tarpon fishing, which lends it, this also lends big tarpon fishing, I think, to storytelling, is that you're sitting there in the diner maybe before you're going, and you're so excited, your knees walking up and down, because you're like,
yeah.
oh, I'm gonna get out there and see these huge fish. But there's a slight bit of fear in there as well, because if you hook one of these big fish, like what it's going to do to you, what you're going to do
Yeah,
to you.
yeah.
So there's this Kant had this, he described the sublime as beauty mixed with terror, and that to me
Uh-huh.
is big tarpon fishing. Like it is that, because you really, I've seen, I won't mention names, some of the best anglers that I know. I've seen them in a bow and seen a 120-pound tarpon come at them, and seen this person, who is the best caster I've ever seen,
Uh-huh.
completely lose his shit and like cast it, things all around his head, and his knees are actually like visibly knocking together. But that is so fun. I mean, that is like, where do you get that high in life? I mean, it's a, it's a, it's so cool. Like, also I talk about in the book about this mind clearing part of tarpon
Yeah.
fishing. Thinking about your taxes, you're not thinking about your mortgage, you're not thinking about politics. You are just completely, your mind is completely emptied, and you're thinking
Yeah.
about this beast coming at you. What you're going to do with it.
Yeah. So you said you're not interested in records. I've never maybe I've never been interested in a record because it's probably never been something in reach for any fish I've pursued. But uh, I think I know what drives people. I mean, people like to be on top,
Yeah.
I suppose. But so if a record is so important to you, what happens to these folks when someone breaks it? That must is it, it. Do they get the equal pain to the pleasure that they get from setting the record?
Just judging from Tom Evans and Billy Pate, I think it's more painful to lose
To lose
than
it?
it is to win, right? And I think
Yeah,
that's also a lot of very high achieving people, Nick Saban being one of them. Winning was okay, but losing
yeah,
was awful. It's a little bit like, I mean, I hate to even put it in these terms, a little bit like a drug addiction. You're not
yeah.
necessarily, at some point during your drug addiction, you're not trying to get high. You're trying to not be not high. If you know what I'm saying. So you're trying to
Yeah, right.
stave off the shakes and stave off all the withdrawal symptoms, basically. So there's a pretty decent similarity between those two things. Yeah, but
Yeah.
there was a time in Homosassa when Billy Pate, Tom Evans went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and I think there was kind of like like one will be on top. They
Yeah.
or a nasty letter or whatever like that. But yeah, I mean, the pain of losing that was. I got a hold of Tom Evans. He kept a logbook for I don't know how many years, 20 some odd years, and which was
Uh-huh.
awesome. So every day had something, and he's this kind of like it's not haiku, but he's kind of a weird genius poet with like 5 words. He does, he had one. I was just talking to somebody about this the other day. One, he wants to name his boat this, but one of his log lines was like, May 11th, 1984, and it just says El Succo Huge. Just brilliant, right? This guy wanted to name his boat El Succo Huge, but in that logbook, whenever he would catch a world record, it would just kind of be very kind of like, got the 16 record today, period. But when Billy Pate or someone else would break one of his records, it was a little bit longer and more painful and more kind of drawn out. So you could definitely tell
Yeah.
that is the thing that they're almost trying to avoid that, I guess,
Uh-huh. Oh, wow. What, hey, how, I mean, you're familiar with others, the largemouth bass, in general, how common does a fishing record get set by a tourist or a weekend warrior?
It's a great question.
And that
Uh,
must really tick these guys off when it
yeah,
happens.
um, that's a great question. I think maybe for the big sort of glamour species, a lot less than some of the other species.
Uh-huh.
First of all, a tourist angler might not know that they've caught a record to begin with.
Yeah.
Might not be rigged up correctly. Might not take all the steps. In order to get a
Ah, gotcha.
IGFA
Sure.
approved record, you've got to jump through all these hoops. So they're probably not set up for it. It does happen.
Yeah.
It does happen. A lot of times the guides know. If you're fishing with a guide, they'll have you set up. But for the glamour species, for the big billfish, and for tarpon, and for bass, and for some of the salmon, it's like it's that doesn't happen all that often. Because also the IGFA is its own little world of record hunters. And
Uh-huh.
they're really after it. And a lot of those people, as you mentioned before, have the means to kind of I met a couple
Yeah.
people along the way here. I mean, some guys who just do billfish, and that's all they do all year. They're in
Uh-huh.
Australia, they're in off the coast of Costa Rica, whatever. That's just, they go from spot to spot to spot to either fish in tournaments or fish for records. It's their thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're ready. I mean, they're all rigged up correctly. They've got the right, they're ready for the process.
Yeah. On the topic of these personalities, I'm going to just take a little turn here and talk about another one of your books, Nick Saban.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say Nick Saban was in the news a lot recently, but Nick Saban's always in the news. That's what winning does for you. But let's talk a little bit about your book about Nick Saban. When did that come out?
Either 15 or 16. I can't remember.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I know, when I was looking into that book and one of the taglines on it said something about controversy, and I know Nick had a little bit of when the book came out, he wasn't totally happy, I suppose.
Yep.
Other than that, was there any big controversial parts in that book that have either stood the test of time or not stood the test of time?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard. There's been no, and he never had it anyway. There's been no kind of all the facts checked out. So
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
been no. He never pushed back on any of the facts. He just pushed back on on whether or not it's proper for someone else to write a biography of you. Which
Right.
if you're a public figure and you are the highest paid employee in your state, then it's always okay for someone to do
Right.
that. What's
Yeah.
interesting about that whole thing is actually it was that book came out of a Forbes story. I
Yeah. Yeah.
In Nick's second year at Alabama, he had come off two not very good years at the Dolphins and a very controversial sort of tenure there. And then his first year at Alabama was not very good either. They lost to like Southern Mississippi. They finished like 7-5 or something like that. But I thought, you could I talked to some people down there, you kind of tell that the tide was turning, so to speak. And so I actually wrote him a letter. I typed it, but I wrote a letter and sent it to him and said, hey, I'd like to do this as a classic kind of business turnaround story. I'd love to do how you're planning on doing this. And I remember sitting at my desk one day and just doing something else, and the phone rang, and Monte, this is Nick Saban. Come down whenever you want to come down. I was like, all right, cool. So I go down and spent the better part of 72 hours with him, sort of just following him around. We did an ad shoot for Mercedes. He did like a couple of morning shows, and interviewed him in the car on the way to these things, and then interviewed him in his office. And I remember at one point I was in his office. We were having lunch. And his secretary came and said, there's a recruiting call. And he said, you're going to have to step out for this. I remember running out. This is like probably day 2, running out to the car and calling my wife and saying, holy crap, this is a huge story. I'm so excited. Because it was just, you could tell everyone was singing from the same, hymnal. Everyone, from the cafeteria staff to the defensive coordinator to all the players, like you could tell something huge was happening there. And so that story actually ended up on the cover of Forbes, and he pretended to not like it when I went down to visit him, talk about this book. He had it all; it was blown up right on the outside of the, so they probably used it for purposes. But anyway, so we had a kind of functional relationship. He talked to me for a little while, then he decided not to talk to me, and then towards the end of my reporting, he gave me a bunch of people to talk to, like his golfing partner, stuff like that. So we had this kind of give and take relationship. I think I was fair to him. I definitely reported, if something. I found out something and I could corroborate that it was true and it wasn't very flattering to him. I didn't care. My job was not to him. It's to the readers out there. And I think, people can see right through a puff piece, and they don't want to read what's interesting about a puff piece, nothing at all. It's like PR stuff. So you want to read something that's, true. And so, the bad things he did at the Dolphins, I wrote about that, tirades. And then there's some weird things that his wife actually got mad about, which was actually a very good piece of advice. The thing I think that set off that press conference he had. Was he had a meeting one time with his players, and he was telling them to never, that nothing good happens after midnight, and that to never, engage with someone, whether it's a fight or whatever, with someone who has less to lose than you do. Which I think is great advice. I tell my kids that all the time.
Excellent advice.
So he's telling these kids, he's also talking about their late night adventures with women. He's like, don't just, and then he said, if I ever messed around and Miss Terry, it'd have to be with Hillary Clinton. And apparently when he said that, like the whole team hit the floor laughing. So, and I made sure that was right. I had 15 different people who were in that room tell me that's exactly what happened. They all had the exact same story. So I knew that was the story. I printed it, and his wife hated it, of course. And so I think that was actually, she was kind of the impetus behind him getting up and saying something about it. But no, it's fine. All of it's held up. I mean, the dalliance with Texas, all of it's, kind of knock on wood, all of it's held up so far.
Yeah.
And he's amazing. He's the best college football coach of all time, hands down.
Yeah.
I don't think, Bear Bryant had almost as many national titles, but it was a totally different game back then. And he navigated all these things, these changes in the game, which happened so quickly. This evolution of the game happened so quickly during his tenure, and he navigated all of them well. Even NIL, I think he got sick of it at the end. They were within 7 points of beating the eventual national champions.
Right.
It's not like, he was still on top of his game. I was very surprised, actually, that when I heard he retired. I remember, I was going to pick up my kid at school, actually, and someone called me and told me that. And I was like, wow, because it just seemed like, I know he's older, but it just seemed like he had almost gotten a national title, and he had a great team coming back and a great recruiting class coming in. Now, with months past, I totally understand why he retired. It was exactly the right call. It's just a different era, a different kind of kid. Good for those kids, by the way, for making money.
Right.
that's all awesome, but it's got to be hard to manage that when someone's like, I'm going to go play for Ohio State unless you give me a Lamborghini. Like that's for a coach like Nick Saban, they're just like,
Yeah.
he's not wired that way. I'll put it that way.
Right. Speaking of his wiring, so let's see, hyper competitive,
Yeah.
obsessive,
Yep.
diligent.
Yeah.
Seems like similar traits to tarpon record hunters.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
how does Nick Saban, that personality, how does that compare to those folks?
well, it's a great question. So he actually likes to catch tarpon too, by the way.
Oh, does he?
He's a spin guy, yeah, but he's caught a bunch in Boca Graham when he lived there. So they're very obvious parallels, right? Like meticulous preparation, singular focus, stuff like that. But to me, the thing the sort of thing that maybe is not so obvious that parallels between Nick Saban and these world record chasers is the love of the journey, and the goal is awesome, obviously, and you need a goal in order to define what the journey is, which a lot of people lose when they say, "Hey, what's the process?" and it's not the final thing. But without that final thing, there's no definition of what the process is. So you definitely need that. But that to me was always, he famously called it the process, and he fell in love with the minutia that goes into running a football program. He fell in love with the practices, and the DBs getting their hips straight, and what kind of food the cafeteria. Like he just fell in love with all those steps. And the best of these obsessive world record chasers all also fell in love with all of the little things that go into the making, into the journey, into the process of this whole thing. So it's not necessarily, the end goal, again, gives definition. It's very important to have, but all of these people love the minutia of what they do, right? They just fall in love with it. They fall in love with the leaders. They fall in love with the flies. They fall in love with like trying to get the equipment correct. They fall in love with the whole mental aspect of it. And I think that's probably the biggest similarity. In fact, I think that's the biggest, that all obsessives are sort of like that. They like the little things that kind of go into it.
Uh-huh.
We all, I'm kind of like that. I like, it's great to have a finished book, obviously.
Sure.
Great to have one out there to sell, but that's the most painful process of the whole damn thing. I love working on a book. Like it's so fun recording it. I love when I'm really in the flow, the 6 months or 8 months it takes to actually write one is I'm just like really tuned into I feel like I'm on the right frequency in the world, stuff like that. And then when it comes out, it's kind of like this, it's out of your control. It's your baby's like been born and is out in the world somewhere, and people can love it or hate it, or they can do whatever they want to do with it, or not buy it or buy it. And so that's a little less pleasant, and you have to publicize it, which has always driven me really crazy. But
sure.
So I think it's the similarity is just enjoying the little steps it takes to get to that destination.
I don't know if you can quantify this, but so you put all of that work into the book, you get all of the things you're getting out of it. You finish it, it's complete, and for whatever reason, it's not going to go to the public. How what's the right way to put it? If 100% is the joy you get out of writing it, plus seeing people read it and whatever success it has, how much do you lose if all you got to do was go through all of the writing process?
Well, thankfully, I haven't faced that problem yet.
Yeah, right.
I hope I never do. I hope I never work on a book that never goes out.
Yeah.
So again, I think as painful as the publishing process is and the publicizing process is, and the highs and lows of reviews or not being reviewed and people liking it on Amazon or not liking it on Amazon and stuff like that, as painful of all that is, it's definitely necessary. Like it has to be. You have to have that, otherwise none of the other stuff is meaningful. Right?
Yeah.
So, but I do love that that there's my favorite part of it is that time when it's just me in the book.
Right.
It's just the two of us. And this is even before I involved my editor and stuff like that. This is like it's just us.
Yeah.
And then everything else is can be pleasurable. It's fun to it's fun to do podcasts like this and
sure.
Talk about stuff like that. But it's a lot of it is sort of like your emotional, your tiller is going all over the place, whereas when you're writing it, you feel very centered. You feel very, just feel kind of in rhythm with life. It's always been a very funny thing. And it's always, it can be awesome. I mean, with the Nick Saban book, it was incredible. I went on ESPN a couple times. I did, countless interviews, stuff like that. It was all fun, but that's its own little high, but it's a very different high from the high of actually
Yeah.
when you're trying to craft sentences, stuff like that, which to me is a much more enjoyable high. The other one's unsustainable. It's like I don't know. It's just not it just goes too
Yeah.
high and too low and too high and too low, so.
Yeah. Well, you're taking it's a cliche, I suppose, the blank page. And when you're finished, there's something there that
Yeah.
no other person could have created except for
Yeah.
Monte Burke.
That
Right.
is an interesting
Yeah.
thing, especially with AI now. I mean, even nonfiction books are novel, right? I mean, no one's
Yeah.
written plagiarizing. No one's written anything like you're doing, and there's a real cool aspect to that. The
Yeah.
crazy thing to me is, been doing this for a while now. It doesn't get any easier. Like, I sort of expected it to get easier, but I'm kind of glad it doesn't. Like, that's kind of like
Yeah.
it. And I'm talking about even doing, like, if I write a 300-word story for a magazine and stuff like that, it's still hard. When you look at that
Yeah.
blank page and the cursor's blinking right there, like, okay, how am I gonna do this? But
Yeah.
that is so vitally important because you can never get lazy. You can never
Uh-huh.
get complacent. You got to every time you have to sit down and do it. And
Yeah.
so in some ways, it's the best thing about this livelihood, this job, is that it doesn't get easier.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
Yeah.
Hopefully, it doesn't get too much harder. That's when maybe if you're going that way, you might be in trouble. But it just doesn't get it just does not get easier, which is
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Oddly.
Hey, let's go. I'm going to go back to fishing writing. I heard you on another podcast mention something, and I actually asked a similar question. I interviewed Nick Lyons and asked him the
Mhm,
same kind of thing. So, you mentioned something about a Mount Rushmore for fly
mhm.
fishing writers. So I'll give you 4 or 5. You can have 5 if you need them, or you can have as many as you want. Who are you going to put on your Mount Rushmore for fly fishing writers?
So it's so hard. So one of the first books I ever did was a compilation of Atlantic salmon stories. So I went all the way
Uh-huh.
back to the beginning of Atlantic salmon writing, and there were some really good writers. I mean, the style back then was kind of interesting. It was it was written in a very kind of chin up kind of style. So I unfortunately I don't think I can include, just because the styles are so different. I can't include someone from way back then. But I mean, McGuane is definitely on there
Uh-huh.
for reasons I already mentioned. I think Girac is on there just for his incredible ease with which his stories are read. It's like sitting down with an old friend and having him tell
Yeah.
you. Um, I
You
mean,
know,
how
by the
can
way, I think he uh uh we talked about bad Hemingway.
yeah,
I think there's bad Garak too.
there's a lot. In fact, I would say in the fly fishing world, there's more bad Girac than more than Hemingway.
Yeah, yeah.
Most people are trying to get that easygoing, which seems so like it comes so easy and natural to him, which it might. But my guess is he works really hard at it, to get that kind of, he's got all of his uh, stories have the same tone, have the same musical note,
Yeah.
and it's I haven't met many people who don't just enjoy it. I mean,
Yeah.
you just sit
Yeah.
down. I love every time he's now in Trying Limited magazine. It's the first story I read. I go to the back,
Yeah. Yeah.
read that story. I don't care if he's talking about fishing for walleye or talking about trout or brook, whatever. I'm in.
Yeah. And I heard him in an interview once talk about yeah, obviously he works hard. But the journalist in him fact checking.
Yeah.
He said
Yep.
that, and I was thinking, well, his stories are his stories. He can
Yep.
tell them the way he wants, but if he's going to name a mountain, he's going to make sure that he has the right name.
Which is
Yeah.
great. It's great to hear
Yeah.
that. I mean, the dirty little secret behind all the good writers that I've ever met is they work really, really, really hard.
Yeah.
There's no, when I was young, I always thought you'd be sitting, at your typewriter, I guess, or sitting with your pen and paper or maybe a computer, and the muse would come down and visit you. And you'd just be like, it'd be like you're in a trance and you're just going. And that does happen every once in a while. But most of this is like, is sitting down and trying to push out things when they're not working, and just like it's hard work, really. I mean, and
Yeah.
that's what the best writers I know. McGuane, I know, works his butt off. So I mean, that's kind of the trade, I think. All right, so we got McGuane,
Yeah.
we got Gear.
Yeah.
You can't not put Norman McLean on there. You just
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah.
I don't think. And then I mean, Nick Lyons would be one that I love his stuff. I mean, and
Oh,
he's
yeah.
he would be on there for a number of reasons, not only for his writing, but what, he really, during that sort of before and during the River Runs Through It 94 kind of thing, he was publishing fishing writing. And
Yes.
he was championing, younger writers, stuff like that, and really keeping it kind of in the forefront. So he would go on there, I think, as both a writer and an editor who was a champion of the form.
Yep.
And then, I don't know. I mean, do you, from that point on, it's kind of tough. I mean, do you go, part of me would say maybe it's like, maybe you have a half Lefty Kray's face and half of Tom Rosenbauer's face. And you would have those two, not only for their writing, Lefty was a very prolific writer. We don't think about that about him now, but he really was a very prolific writer.
Right.
Back before he became just the showman. And Rosenbauer stuff, Tom Rosenbauer from Orvis, he's written 25 books or stuff like that. His books have helped get people, into this sport. He's arguably kind of the new Lefty Kray, the guy who kind of like is at the shows and is kind of, helping to get more and more people into the sport. So I think they would have to have some place on there, I think.
I think I heard the Orvis Fly Fishing Guide, Tom's book. Yeah. I think I saw that it has sold over 500,000 copies.
Yeah, doesn't surprise me. I mean, it's the gold standard.
Yeah.
Tom was actually a very good writer too.
Yes,
I've read some of his. He did a really cool book. I forget what it's called now, but it was about fishing in the ocean. And Andy Anderson, I think, took the photographs, and the writing in there is really good. Writes about bone fishing, he writes about striper fishing and stuff like that. So yeah, you'd have to have some. So I think that kind of balances it out a little bit. You've got the sort of 3 writers, and then you've got the sort of Nick Lyons is the sort of writer / editor, and then you have a half and half with Lefty and Tom, the 2 kind of ambassadors of the sport.
Yeah, we'll take it. Hey, I've had you here about an hour. Let's. What are you working on? What are your new projects?
So I've been working on another college football book.
Okay.
Which I'm excited about, and that is due. That's actually not due. I got a long leash on this one, which I never get. That's not due until next June. So I've got a little more than a year.
Okay.
To kind of do it. And in the interim, I'm going to have a collection of my angling stories, actually, which is coming out.
Are they stories that have already been published for magazines, that type of thing?
Let's see, all but maybe I think there are going to be 30 of them. All but 4 have already been published. But these go all the way back to 2004. It's kind of fun to read yourself back when you were in your 20s. And but yes, they've been kind of published all over the place. So there's some in Forbes, some in the New York Times, some in Garden and Gun, some in the Drake, some in the Anglers Journal. I mean, it's kind of fun. It's a little fun. It's kind of fun to go back and kind of figure out which ones make the cut, which ones don't. How to group them together.
And when did you say that'll be out?
That should actually come out. That's due pretty soon, and it should come out next June. So
next June.
Right as I'm turning in the college football book, that one should come out.
Okay. What is there? Or do you want to talk about it? Is there a topic for the college football book?
Yeah. So I don't know if I should talk about it, but I'll tell you. I'm looking back onto the Pete Carroll era at USC. So he was there for 9 years, and that he kind of took a moribund program and elevated it. They won 2 titles in a row, and Texas in what's considered to be the greatest game of all time. And then it kind of like Icarus, they kind of fell from flew to the sun and fell off. And it's very interesting to kind of look back at the reasons that they were punished. They kind of some of them look a little silly now, some of them don't. Reggie Bush wasn't doing anything much different from what's going on right now, but there were other things going on which are interesting. But the cool thing about this project is that they kind of ran the town at that time. They were, there was no Shaq had left the Lakers. There were no NFL teams. Gretzky had left the Kings. These were the guys.
That's right. Yeah.
Will Ferrell and Snoop and The Rock and all these people going to practices. I mean, they and Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush and all these guys and Lendale White, they ran the town.
Yeah.
And Carroll let them do it. Like he had this philosophy of let the kids be kids, and then when we want to concentrate we can, and this is all good for them because they'll learn how to deal with distractions. And so, and then to see how Carroll left is also fascinating. He left
Yeah, yeah.
Seahawks, so it's fun. It's not. I'm usually an SEC or South. I write about Southern football coaches, but it's kind of fun to go venture out to the West Coast and look in.
Do you have a title you can share for your fishing essays?
I was going to call it "Swims with the Fishes," but I just found out that a buddy of mine had that as a chapter title for one of his books. So now, if you have any ideas, I am literally. I asked my 11-year-old. I was like, "What should I call this thing?" I have no idea.
No
Very
idea.
hard.
Oh, it is.
You don't want to be cliche, especially with fishing books. You don't want to, there's all sorts of. You can be too precious, So I don't want to be too precious, but I also don't want to be too esoteric. So it's really hard.
Yeah.
All
right.
The USC books either going to be called Kings of LA or Men of Troy. I'm not sure which one yet. These are the working titles. So.
Okay. Well, we'll look forward to both those. All right, let's take you out of here with some relatively quick questions. So you've profiled an awful lot of people, variety of areas. Did you have a biggest surprise? Someone that was surprised you from what you thought going in?
I mean, a lot of them. Nick Saban would be. We've already talked to him, but he was a big surprise because I'll give you the brief why he was so surprised. He had this. You thought that he was just a total a-hole who hated the press and was just a really unlikable kind of person. And then when you actually meet him, and I realized how charismatic he was one-on-one, like extremely charismatic, which I should have known earlier. That's the reason why he became such a great recruiter.
Yeah,
he is very charismatic. He hates big groups. He's kind of introvert, but he's good one-on-one. But I would say probably I did a story one time on a former president, George H.W. Bush. Mm-hmm. And which was really
I just
fun.
read that one yesterday. Yeah.
I love that story. Was so great because I had no idea. I pitched them this story, pitched people this story, and come on down. I don't know if you want to talk about it. I didn't know the story was going to really happen. It was kind of like all up in the air. And what was cool, surprising in a really cool way, is how into it he was, like how animated and excited he was to talk about all this stuff. And inadvertently, through the story, we broke a little news. There was one anecdote in the stories that he, when he was vice president, Ronald Reagan and went in to get his polyp removed. So he was out for 8 months. And H.W. was president then. They transferred power.
Right.
And he just got bored, as he always did. He was always restless. He just got bored sitting around. He was supposed to sit around and be in a safe place surrounded by people because he was the president. And so he said, screw it, I'm going to go play tennis. So he played tennis, and he was also kind of notoriously, balance kind of was weird. He's kind of like lanky guy who fell down or goes well. So he's playing tennis. He's rushing a ball at the net, slips and falls and hits his head on the post that holds the net up and is out for moments, possibly minutes. And so for that brief amount of time, Tip O'Neill, who was the Speaker of the House, was actually president of the United States. Yeah. And so it's so funny. He told me that story. I wrote it, and then I had all these historians calling me like, wait, is that true? Is there a way to fact check this? Like, because it was like for them, it was like this juicy part, that they didn't know about. So it was cool. He was just wonderful. I mean, he was kind of banged up at that time and kind of living in the past, although he was still jumping out of airplanes and still fishing. So that was really cool to talk to him about that.
Yeah, no, that reminded me when I was reading that I believe it was in Fly Fishing Through the Midlife Crisis. Hal Raines talked about at one point he went to interview George H. And he said he fully expected to not like him at all, and he came out of there liking him.
Yeah,
he went on. I think he went out on a boat with him.
Yeah, and there's a great anecdote in that book because I remember when you bring it up, I totally remember it now. He walks in, he walks in too early, and somehow gets through all security, and like Barbara and George are in their pajamas, and they kind of come up and say, "Oh God, I'll be there in a minute. I'm just getting up a little late." It was really funny.
Yeah. Hey, who's your greatest inspiration as a writer? Is there one?
It's just I that's almost impossible to.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned McGuane earlier, but I'm a big fan of Richard Ford's. I love Lauren Groff. I love James Salter's. Probably my favorite book of all time is James Salter, Light Years. Is just a beautiful book. So yeah, those are novelists. I tend to be sort of my inspiration.
Okay, yeah. let's see. I'm going to invent a world that doesn't exist. You only get to fish for one type of fish. What's it going to be?
Just not so sure. I'm not so sure I could really narrow that down. So I'm gonna cheat.
Okay, cheat.
I'm gonna say because I'm very much a love the one you're with. Like I love when I'm back home in Alabama, I'm fishing for brim with a popper. Like I'm pretty happy, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But just in terms of pure sort of excitement, I would say you know probably tarpon and Atlantic salmon, or the and I do both of them for like a week every year, and it's just
yeah,
there's just something so cool about. They're cool in very different ways.
yeah.
The fish themselves actually are both like very acrobatic and both known as the king of game fish. They battle for that title, but for
Yeah,
good reason. But those weeks to me are the ones I look forward to the most. I think.
yeah, yeah. So you live in a big city.
Do.
What's your favorite small town?
Chokoloskee,
Uh-huh.
Florida.
Yeah,
It's right. I don't know if people know about it, but it's near
yeah,
Everglades City, which is itself a great town.
yeah.
One of the last great frontier towns in Florida, if not the last one. But Chokoloskee's you go over a causeway and there's Chokoloskee right there, which is an old Native American midden. So it's where for centuries they threw their shells after they ate the Calusa
Oh, yeah,
Indians,
yeah.
and it's an island, like it's an actual island and it has houses on it, and it's where when I fish with Steve Huff, we trailer the boat there because we put in at Ted Jurassic's dock. Ted Jurassic is the founder of the Tibor Reel Company,
Okay.
Hungarian immigrant, just a fantastic guy, and we never see him in the morning, but whenever we come back in the evening, Ted always wanders out, and says hello. So there's something really cool about Chokoloskee to me.
Yeah.
My favorite little town. Yeah.
Okay. I heard you on another podcast. Someone asked you your favorite music, and you surprised the heck out of me. You said you're a Swiftie. Have you seen her?
I'm wearing a Taylor Swift. My daughter maybe this. It's a Taylor Swift. So
Okay.
I'm a little less of a Swift. That must have been an earlier podcast. She got a little overexposed when she with the Travis Kelce thing. I think it was
Uh-huh.
real fun when it was just me and 3 million other little girls who liked her. And now that the whole world, I have 3 daughters, so I got
Yeah.
exposed, and they're sort of they feel like Taylor may have jumped the shark a little bit too. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, but I still like her music. I admire her. She writes all of her own
Oh,
music.
yeah.
It's really, really, she's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
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 But no, I don't.
Yeah.
It's hard. I'm not. I don't really have one. I like all kinds of music, and now that my kids are a little bit older, they kind of control the music now, so it's fun to listen to
Yeah.
their. I never would have listened to Drake without my older
Uh-huh.
2 daughters who listen to Drake all the time, and I like some of Drake's music. So
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
lot
Yeah.
of.
I have a friend who we played he covers Taylor Swift's "Shake It Off,"
Yeah.
but acoustic,
Oh,
and
nice.
it's an incredible song. I had
Yeah.
no idea how deep that song was. It's
Yeah.
it's
See,
it's
there's
totally
a
different.
whole lot to admire, especially the whole writing your own songs is a really cool thing. That just doesn't happen very
Yeah,
much. And,
yeah, yeah. Well, Monty, I've kept you for quite a while here. I'm going to let you go, but I want to thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to
of
chat with
course.
us, and it's been a pleasure for me. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank
My
you.
son and his wife live in on. They moved to Manhattan, and you know my wife's been out to visit him. I haven't been out yet, but you said something earlier today that has me a little more excited about getting to the big city now. You said I can fish there.
Oh, heck yeah.
Uh, so I
And
will be
really,
in touch at some point and get some
really good
advice
fish.
from you.
Yeah.
Uh,
So from about right now, they're all in the back bays right now. So I don't know if you fly into JFK, you fly over Jamaica Bay, which is just
uh-huh.
this incredible place to fish right now. And it goes all the way through. If you want it, you can fish all the way to December. Some of the bigger
Really?
fish migrate through in December. I used to fish a lot. I used to fish Christmas Eve was always my last day, and I've stopped kind of doing that lately because it's like usually 20 degrees. So, but you can literally fish that long. That's how long the season is. Stripers, bluefish, weakfish. In the fall, you get bonito and false albacore. It is a really exciting, crazy
Yeah.
exciting fish. So
All
yeah,
right.
when you come, let me know and I'll take you out.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Because yeah, it's been great, but yeah, the next time we meet, rather than looking at each other on these screens, that'd be great to be
Yep,
standing with rods in our hands here.
that would be cool.
Yeah,
Thanks for
yeah.
having me on.
Well, thank you for being here. Appreciate it so much.